There are women who walk this earth like ancient mountains, women whose solitude is not born of lack, but of fire. They live alone, not as punishment, nor as pause, but as path. They do not orbit husbands, lovers, or children like moons around a sun. They are their own gravitational center, and because of this, they are feared. Because of this, they are misunderstood. Because of this, they are holy. You may not notice them at first. They do not clamor for attention. They do not perform femininity for your comfort. But if you are quiet, if you listen with the ears of the soul, you will hear their silence humming like a hymn beneath the noise of the world. They are the descendants of Lilith, who would not lie beneath Adam. They are the kin of Artemis, who chose the forest over the altar. They are the forgotten daughters of the divine, not discarded, but departed. And they are not alone because no man wanted them. They are alone because they refused to contort their essence for a place beside a man who had not yet met his own soul. For centuries, the woman alone has been cast in shadow, branded bitter, cold, unnatural. Why? Because the image of a woman unattached threatens the illusions we cling to about love, dependence, and control. Because the individuated woman is a mirror too bright for most to face. To live without a man is not simply to live in an empty house. It is to live in a psychic temple, where every object is chosen, every silence is sacred, and every need is finally one's own. And yet, this path is not easy. To live alone as a woman is not to escape suffering. It is to suffer consciously. It is to walk into the wilderness of one's own psyche, without the distraction of appeasement or performance. It is to encounter the animus, the inner masculine, not as fantasy, but as a fractured God demanding integration. She does not slam the door on men. She simply stops using them as mirrors. And so, she turns inward, into the silence, into the night, into the eternal aloneness where the self waits. There, she meets her unloved selves. There, she remembers the scent of her grandmother's skin. There, she weeps for all the times she made herself smaller to be held. And there, at last, she learns to hold herself, not with clenched teeth, but with awe. This is not a woman in exile. This is a woman returning to her kingdom. For in every age, the solitary woman has been both witch and saint. Witch, because she defies the order. Saint, because she embodies the soul. Her solitude is not empty space. It is full of dreams, full of breath, full of her. And while others rush to be half of something, she waits, builds, becomes, until she is whole. And when love comes, if it comes, it must meet her as an equal, not as savior, not as master, not as project, but as one who has met their own darkness and did not flinch. The truth is, the woman who lives alone is not missing anything. She is shedding everything that once asked her to abandon herself. She is not lonely. She is in ritual. She is not afraid. She has already descended. She is not undone. She is becoming. A woman does not arrive at solitude without first knowing the ache of being unseen. The path to her aloneness begins not in strength, but in sorrow. Not in empowerment, but in the quiet death of who she once tried to be. She was not born solitary. She was born longing. Longing to be held, to be heard, to be mirrored. She came into the world with a soul wide open, radiant, eager, trusting. And for a while, she may have been adored, until the world made its terms known, shrink to be loved, soften to be safe, perform to belong. The first wound is often invisible. It is not bruises or screams. It is the silence when she cried and no one came. It is the subtle recoil when she spoke her truth. It is the ache of being too much, or not enough, for the ones she needed most. Here is where the psyche splits. To be fully herself meant rejection, so she began to fracture. A smile over pain, a yes over a sacred no, a mask over her face, until even she could not remember who was beneath. The father wound may live here, not always a cruel father, sometimes simply an absent one, a man who could not mirror her essence because he had never met his own. She grows up learning that the masculine does not hold, it judges, it withdraws, it devours. So she becomes adaptable, exquisite in sensing what is needed, masterful in becoming what is expected. And in this shape-shifting, she begins to disappear, Then comes the relationship, or the series of them. Each one feels like home at first, until it doesn't. She finds herself giving more, understanding more, holding more, until her hands are empty and her soul is tired. She becomes the therapist, the rescuer, the forgiver, the girl who does not need too much. And always, beneath it all, maybe if I am good enough, he will stay. Maybe if I hurt less, he will love more. This is not love, this is penance. Then one day the pattern fractures. He leaves, or she does. But the rupture is sacred. For the first time, she does not run into another man's arms. She runs into herself and finds there a stranger waiting. It is here the wound becomes portal. She sits in the silence. She looks around the empty room, and something ancient stirs. A question, not from the ego, but from the self. Who have I been trying to become? Who was I before I was pleasing? The aloneness becomes unbearable. Then it becomes holy. This is not yet healing. This is the raw terrain of descent. The mask is gone, but the self is not yet visible. The heart is open, but the soul is disoriented. Grief rises like a tide, not only for the man lost, but for the years lost in trying to be lovable. She cries for the girl who needed to be seen, for the woman who waited to be chosen, for the parts of herself she silenced to stay close to someone who was far. This is sacred work. This is the underworld. In Jungian language, she is encountering her shadow, the hidden pain, the rage, the unmet desire, not to banish it, but to witness it, to say, I see you now, and I will never abandon you again. And all around her, society whispers, she just needs to find the right man. She's too much. She'll change her mind. Women aren't meant to be alone, but beneath those voices lies a deeper silence, the silence of truth. She has always been alone. Even in love, she was alone, because she could not bring herself into the room. And so, for the first time, she chooses solitude not as absence, but as devotion. Not to punish men, not to harden her heart, but to feel it all, fully, wildly, without apology. This is how the wound becomes a womb, a place where the false self dies, and the true self begins to breathe. There is a pattern that forms in the soul like the grooves of an ancient river. It winds quietly beneath behavior, beneath intention, beneath even pain. A woman who has been wounded, not only by others, but by the conditions of being unseen, does not simply move on. She forms a psychic loop. She carries it with her like an invisible thread, weaving it unconsciously into every bond she tries to build. Jung called this the compulsion to repeat, not because we want the wound, but because the soul demands its resolution. She does not know yet that she is chasing completion in another. She only knows that something feels missing, and so she projects her animus, the inner masculine, onto the face of a man. At first it feels like destiny, a gravitational pull, a man who sees her, or needs her, or awakens something ancient in her bone. But soon the pattern returns. She softens too quickly. She overgives. She begins to orbit again. The ache begins where the identity ends. She cannot feel herself when in love, and yet she cannot bear to be unloved. This is the sacred polarity of the wounded feminine psyche. She longs for connection, but every connection threatens annihilation. She does not know yet that it is not the man she fears. It is the part of herself she loses when she is with him. Let us now speak of the animus. In Jungian psychology, the animus is the inner masculine figure in the psyche of a woman. It is not simply her image of men. It is her relationship to assertion, boundaries, direction, protection, logos. When the animus is unconscious, it appears externally. It becomes fantasy. It becomes chaos. It becomes addiction. She searches for a man to complete her, not because she is weak, but because her own inner masculine is fragmented, buried, or exiled. And so, the lover becomes the father. The partner becomes the savior. The relationship becomes the battleground. There is a script she follows without knowing. It begins in attraction, a deep, archetypal hunger. He promises safety, power, perhaps even worship. But beneath the surface, she begins to disappear. Why? Because the part of her that should hold her, protect her boundaries, speak her truth, guard her soul, has never been developed. She gave it away when she was small. She learned that power and femininity could not coexist. She learned that love meant pleasing, silencing, adapting. And so, without her animus integrated, she enters each bond unarmored. She over-explains. She over-understands. She bends until the thread snaps again, and the cycle repeats. At this point, the woman may believe something is wrong with her, but it is not her brokenness that repeats. It is her blueprint. The pattern is not a flaw. It is a map. Each man who fails her is an echo of the part of herself she has not yet faced. Now comes the sacred turn. She begins to notice. In the quiet of her solitude, she watches the pattern with new eyes. Why do I disappear in love? Why do I speak so softly when I want to scream? Why do I feel so at home in giving, and so ashamed when I need? These questions do not come from the ego. They come from the self, the inner nucleus of wholeness, calling her back. She remembers. The strength she once gave to others was hers all along. The clarity she demanded from men is the sword buried inside her chest. The devotion she used to pour outward is the water she must now offer herself. The animus awakened, not in domination, but in balance. Not in conquest, but in clarity. She begins to speak her truth without softening it. She begins to walk away without guilt. She begins to trust herself in silence, without reaching for external validation. This is not hardness. This is structure. For the first time, her inner masculine holds her, like a fortress around her softness, like a spine behind her voice, like a riverbank for her intuition to flow through. And now the pattern shifts. The projection dissolves. She no longer needs a man to be her mirror, her father, her rescuer. She may still love, but not to be completed, to be reflected. Because now she brings herself into the room, all of her, without shame, without collapse, without disguise. There is great grief in this revelation, because she sees how long she lived fragmented. She sees how many times she gave away her center in exchange for closeness. She sees how many years she danced in patterns that never loved her back. But within the grief is the fire of transformation. She is no longer willing to abandon herself, even for love, especially for love. This is the beginning of sovereignty, not isolation, but integration. She is not becoming invulnerable. She is becoming whole. The psyche breathes, the pattern is seen, and once seen, it cannot return to shadow. She is no longer merely reacting. She is watching, choosing, becoming. Not a woman untouched by longing, but a woman unwilling to lose herself in it. And from this ground, she prepares to descend deeper. For there is one more layer, not just the pattern, but the shadow beneath it. When a woman no longer flees into distraction, when she has sat beside the ache long enough to name it, when she no longer sees the man as her rescuer, nor herself as the offering, something within her begins to stir. A presence, a silence, a shadow. She stands finally at the threshold of the psyche. Here, the outer world quiets. No lover to impress, no hand to reach for, no name to echo hers in bed. Only breath, only bone, only the mirror of the self. The descent begins not with fire, but with stillness. Not with rebellion, but with seeing. She begins to see the parts of herself that were unloved, not just by men, but by herself. Beneath the wounds and beneath the patterns, there lies a kingdom exiled from consciousness. Rage, hunger, power, desire, knowing. These are not enemies of the feminine. They are her forgotten queens. But she was taught these parts were too much, too angry, too loud, too proud, too wild. So she silenced them to be good, to be loved, to survive. But now, they return. They rise from the cellar of the soul like ancestors asking to be named. And when they do, they come not as guests, but as truth. She meets her rage, not petty anger, but sacred rage. The rage of all the times she said yes when her body screamed no. The rage of a girl who was touched, watched, dismissed. The rage of being made soft in a world that required steel. Rage is not destruction. Rage is a guardian that was chained too early. She meets her desire, not sexual fantasy, but the raw, holy hunger to want, to take up space, to choose with clarity, to receive without apology. Desire is not sin. It is soul direction. She meets her knowing, that small, clear voice she once overrode to keep the peace. The voice that said, "He is lying." The voice that said, "This isn't love." The voice that said, "Go." Intuition is not fragile. It is the oldest intelligence she carries. This is her shadow, not evil, not pathology, but all that was repressed to stay safe, pleasing, desirable. Now it returns with fire. She may try to suppress it again, try to smile through it, try to pray it away, but the psyche has grown wise, and she is tired of being incomplete. To reclaim these parts, she must do the most dangerous thing a woman can do. She must stop apologizing. Here, the persona cracks. That social mask she has worn for years, the smile that hid her soul's scream, the softness that masked her fury, the quiet that made her digestible. And she begins to feel real again. Ugly, glorious, unmanageable, divine. The woman who lives alone is no longer interested in being adored. She is interested in being whole. And here, the world begins to respond. People may call her selfish. Men may call her too much. Friends may pull away. Family may guilt her. Because a woman in her sovereignty is a threat to every system that thrives on her silence. But she does not return to the cage. She does not rebind herself for comfort. She knows now. To be free is to be misunderstood. To be whole is to be holy. Here is the flip. What once looked like loss was revelation. What once felt like exile was protection. What once seemed like failure was the refusal to betray herself again. She begins to laugh differently, move differently, speak in a voice that sounds ancient and newborn at once. She walks not to be seen, but because the ground calls her name. And now, her relationship with the masculine changes. She no longer needs men to be gods. She sees them as mirrors, no more, no less. If they come, they must bring self-awareness. If they speak, they must speak truth. If they touch her, they must do so without shrinking her radiance. She is no longer performing for love. She is love, embodied, expressed, fierce and soft in balance. In Jungian language, she is nearing the integration of opposites, no longer exiled from her rage, no longer projecting her strength, no longer at war with her own mystery. The shadow is no longer feared, it is befriended. The animus is no longer projected, it is married within. The self, once a distant whisper, now stands at the center of her life. She is not perfect. She is not healed in some neat linear way, but she is home. And in this psychic home, there is no performance. There is only presence. She may still desire love, but it will not be a substitute for soul. Her solitude was not the absence of men. It was the presence of herself. And so, she prepares for the final ascent. Not back into the world as she was, but as she now is, whole, sovereign, sacred. A woman who has walked through her own underworld, who has grieved not only what was lost, but what was never given, who has faced the darkness without flinching, does not emerge the same. She is not reborn in light. She is not healed. She is remembered, pieced back together by the hands of her own soul. There is no fanfare, no one to congratulate her. No altar built for this kind of resurrection, only a deeper breath, a quieter mind, a gaze that no longer asks to be understood. She returns to her life, not as a woman waiting, not as a woman orbiting, but as the center of her own sacred circle. She is no longer seeking reflection in another's eyes. She has become her own mirror. Now, her solitude takes on a different tone. It is not exile. It is sanctuary. She chooses what enters her space. She chooses what touches her body. She chooses what reaches her soul. And in that choosing, there is reverence. For years, she gave her energy away like coins on a street. Now, she offers only from overflow. She adorns her space not for aesthetics, but for alignment. Books placed with intention. Objects that carry memory. A scent, a song, a silence that belongs only to her. Her home is no longer a waiting room. It is a temple. Here, the masculine, now integrated within, no longer chases power. It holds her structure. It protects her boundaries. It does not suppress the feminine. It elevates her. And the feminine, that no longer shattered, dances freely within the vessel of her own life. She creates not to be seen, but because creation is her native tongue. She speaks not to be right, but to be real. She moves with the rhythm of her own knowing. Love may come, or it may not, but she does not make it her altar. If a man arrives, he will find her whole, not waiting to be filled, but overflowing with herself. She will not beg for love. She will not shrink to be palatable. She will not abandon the home within her for the promise of someone else's, because now she knows the deepest betrayal is not when others leave. It is when she leaves herself to keep them close, and she will not do that again. She has reclaimed her voice, not loud, but undeniable. She has reclaimed her needs, not needy, but sacred. She has reclaimed her presence, not performative, but piercing. She is no longer manageable. She is true. She is no longer digestible. She is whole. And in her wholeness, there is peace. Not the peace of silence, but the peace of integration. The peace of no longer being at war with herself. Now, she becomes a mirror for others, not to reflect their fantasies, but to confront them with the possibility of their own becoming. Some will love her for this, some will leave, but she does not contort either way. She walks as herself and lets the world decide what it can handle. This is not the end of her becoming. This is the beginning of her being, no longer striving, no longer seeking, just inhabiting. She wakes slowly, moves intentionally, creates without fear, she loves gently, leaves quickly, speaks clearly, because she knows now. Her soul is not for rent. The woman who lives alone is not a myth. She is not a warning. She is not a tragedy. She is the sacred image of reclamation, a life built from ruins, a voice pulled from silence, a soul no longer fragmented by the need to be loved. She lives alone, yes, but she is never alone. She walks with the parts of herself she once left behind. She is woman. She is temple. She is sovereign. If you are a woman who lives alone, not just in the outer world, but in the chambers of your own being, this is not your exile. This is your throne. You were not left behind. You stepped away from illusion, from performance, from any love that asked you to disappear. You have not become hard. You have become whole. And in your stillness, the world may misname you. They may call you lonely. They may call you difficult. They may call you unfinished, but they cannot name what they do not yet understand. Because you are not waiting. You are remembering. You are not empty. You are undivided. You walk without armor, but you are not unprotected. You carry your sovereignty like a flame, not to burn others, but to light the way for those who are still dimming themselves to be loved. Let them misunderstand. Let them question. Let them whisper. You do not owe the world an explanation for your wholeness. You owe only your soul the truth of your becoming. So go ahead. Place both hands on your own heart. Bow not to a man, but to the self who never left you, and say, I am here. I have returned. I am mine.